The rain hammered Shadow Lake's main street with the kind of relentless fury that turned optimism into mud and hope into something you could drown in. March of 1883 had arrived in Wyoming territory, not as a promise of spring, but as winter's last vicious kick, cold enough to numb exposed skin in minutes, heavy enough to blur the world into a gray, watercolor nightmare where shapes moved like ghosts through curtains of falling water. Neshoba stood beneath the overhang of the general store, his dark eyes fixed on the scene unfolding across the street, with the kind of stillness that came from 38 years of learning when to move and when to wait. He had come into town on a simple errand, posting a letter for the militia captain. A task that should have taken 5 minutes, but something about the raised voices outside the Last Light saloon had stopped him cold, some instinct honed over decades of surviving in a world that wanted him dead, pulling his attention toward the commotion like iron to a lodestone. A woman lay sprawled in the churned mud directly in front of the saloon's entrance, her cotton dress torn at the shoulder and plastered to her body by rain and filth. A wool blanket twisted around her legs like a snare. Her dark hair spread across the earth in tangled streams, and from this distance, Neshoba could not tell if she was breathing. A stray shepherd dog with ribs showing through matted fur approached her cautiously, its movements tentative, wary. It sniffed at her outstretched hand, whined low in its throat, then licked her fingers with gentle insistence. The woman's hand twitched. She was alive. An older man stood over her hickory cane, gripped in both hands and raised like a weapon. Even from across the street, Neshoba could see the rage and desperation twisting the man's features into something barely human. Could hear his slurred cursing as he swayed on his feet. Drunk, dangerous. And from the resemblance in their bone structure, the same stubborn jaw, the same high cheekbones, clearly related to the woman bleeding in the mud. Neshoba had lived in Shadow Lake for a year, working as a translator and scout for the territorial militia. He had learned to keep his head down, to speak when spoken to remember every day that his position was as fragile as spider silk in a storm. A Cheyenne man who forgot his place could lose more than a job in this country. He could lose his freedom, his life, everything. But as the old man raised his cane for another strike, Neshoba found his feet moving before his mind could counsel the caution that had kept him alive for 19 years since Sand Creek. His moccasins made no sound, even in the sucking mud. Rain dripped from the brim of his wide hat, from the fringe of his leather jacket, from the black braid that hung between his shoulder blades to the middle of his back. He was not a large man by frontier standards, 5'10", lean and wiry rather than broad, but there was something in the way he moved that made people step aside without quite knowing why. A coiled readiness, a stillness that spoke of violence held carefully in check but never forgotten. He reached the woman just as the cane descended in a vicious arc. His hand shot out and caught it mid-swing, fingers closing around weathered hickory with a grip that stopped the blow as completely as if it had struck stone. The old man grunted and tried to wrench the cane free, his face reddening with effort and rage. He might as well have tried to uproot an oak tree with his bare hands. "Enough," Neshoba said quietly. His English was precise, learned from mission teachers in his youth before Sand Creek, before the massacre that had carved away his innocence and left only the sharp edges of survival. The old man's bloodshot eyes widened as he registered who had stopped him. Not another white man, but an Indian, one of the scouts the militia kept around like trained dogs. "This ain't your concern," Oliver Pike snarled. Neshoba knew him by reputation, a farmer who had lost everything to debt and whiskey. "That's my daughter lying there. My blood. My business. She needs help, not more punishment. She needs discipline." Oliver yanked harder on the cane, his voice rising. "She's been sneaking around behind my back, planning things, hiding things from her own father. She deserves. She deserves not to be beaten in the street like an animal. Neshoba's voice remained soft, but steel ran beneath the words, like a blade in a velvet sheath. He had survived 19 years since Sand Creek by knowing when to bend and when to break. This was a breaking moment. He twisted the cane out of Oliver's grip with a sharp motion that sent the older man staggering backward into the mud. Then he tossed the cane 10 feet away and turned his full attention to the woman. She was trying to sit up now, one hand pressed to her ribs, the other pushing weakly at the ground. Up close, Neshoba could see the damage bruises forming along her jaw in shades of purple and yellow, fresh layered over old. Split skin on her knuckles, where she had tried to block the blows. And something else, something in the careful way she held herself. One arm curved protectively around her middle in a gesture he recognized from his grandmother's work as a midwife. Pregnant. Not far along 3 or 4 months maybe, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. "Can you stand?" he asked, crouching beside her. The woman looked at him for the first time, really looked at him, and her eyes were startling pale blue against the mud, and bruises sharp with an intelligence that pain had not quite dulled. She glanced past him at the dozen townsfolk who had emerged from shops and doorways, drawn by the shouting like carrion birds to a carcass, their faces hungry for scandal and gossip. "Not here," she said, her voice low and hoarse. "Not with eyes on us. Too many questions if we make a scene." Neshoba understood immediately. A woman beaten in public was scandal enough in a frontier town. A woman hiding secrets, and he was certain now that she was hiding something significant, could not afford the scrutiny that would come with a dramatic rescue witnessed by half the town. He looked around quickly, assessing options. The alley between the saloon and the blacksmith's forge was narrow-shadowed, offering the privacy they needed. "Can you walk that far?" She nodded, then immediately closed her eyes and swallowed hard, fighting nausea or dizziness or both. Neshoba slid an arm beneath her shoulders and lifted her with practiced care. She was lighter than he expected, all sharp angles and tension beneath the wet clothing. He could feel her trembling from cold or pain or fear, probably all three. He draped the filthy blanket around her shoulders and guided her toward the alley, his body positioned between her and the watching crowd in a deliberate statement of protection. Oliver retrieved his cane and followed, muttering curses under his breath. The shepherd dog trotted after them, its loyalty to the woman apparently stronger than its fear of the men. The alley was barely wide enough for 2 people side by side, the walls close enough to block most of the rain and create a pocket of relative quiet. Neshoba eased the woman down onto a stack of empty crates, then knelt and opened his saddlebag, which he had carried with him from his horse tied outside the general store. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept it dry through countless storms, was the kit his grandmother had given him when he turned 15, the most precious thing he owned. Wooden splints carved from ash, each one sanded smooth and sized for different bones. Rolls of clean muslin bandage, a clay pot of salve made from pine resin and bear fat, bone needles threaded with sinew, a leather pouch of willow bark for pain, another of yarrow for bleeding, small vials of tinctures his grandmother had taught him to make from herbs and roots. He had carried these tools for 23 years, using them to help people the white doctors would not treat or could not save. Drifters, Indians, the desperately poor, ranch hands who could not afford a doctor's fees. It was his way of keeping his grandmother's memory alive, of staying human in a world that insisted daily that he was something less than human. The woman watched him unwrap a length of bandage, her eyes following his hands, with an attention that suggested she was cataloging every movement, storing it away for later consideration. When he reached for her injured hand, she flinched but did not pull away. "You drew the blow deliberately," he said, as he cleaned the split knuckles with water from his canteen, his touch gentle despite the efficiency of his movements. "Turned your hand at the last second, so it took the cane instead of your face. That takes training or desperation or both. Both, she said, and something like respect flickered in her eyes. You see more than most people. I see what is there, what people try to hide. He rapped her knuckles carefully, his fingers steady and sure from years of practice. You need the doctor. These will get infected without proper care. I can't see the doctor. Her voice was flat final. Why not? She glanced at Oliver, who leaned against the alley wall, breathing hard, his face gray with exhaustion or shame or both. Then she looked back at Neshoba, and he saw her make a decision, the kind of decision that changes everything. Because if I see the doctor, he will ask questions. He will want to examine me, and he will discover something I cannot afford to have discovered. Her free hand moved to her belly, a gesture so brief and unconscious that Neshoba knew she did not realize she had done it. Do you understand what I'm saying? He understood. An unmarried woman pregnant in a frontier town where reputation was the only currency that mattered more than silver. She would lose her business, lose custody of any children in her care, be driven out or worse. Wyoming Territory might have given women the right to vote and own property, but society's judgment remained as harsh as the winter winds that howled down from the mountains. How far along? He asked quietly, tying off the bandage. 4 months, near as I can figure. Her voice was steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. I've been hiding it with loose dresses and shawls, staying out of the doctor's sight. But soon it will be impossible. I need... She stopped, swallowed hard. I need just a little more time to arrange things so that when the truth comes out, I have somewhere to go. Someone to help. What things are you arranging? Before she could answer, Oliver pushed away from the wall. She's planning something illegal, that's what. Been sneaking around for weeks, meeting with the banker in back rooms, hiding money. I followed her yesterday morning, saw her hand over a pouch of coins to Ephraim Keats. When I asked her what it was for, she refused to tell me. So, He gestured vaguely at his daughter, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. The woman Clara Neshoba remembered now. Clara Pike, who ran the Last Light Saloon with an iron will and a reputation for being fair but hard, closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, her gaze was fixed on her father, with an expression that mixed pity and contempt in equal measure. You think beating me will make me trust you with the truth. She laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. You sold the farm to pay your gambling debts. You live off my charity. You drink away every penny I give you, then come crying for more. And you wonder why I don't confide in you. I'm your father. You stopped being my father the day you chose whiskey over family. Clara stood slowly, one hand braced against the wall, and Neshoba saw her sway with pain or exhaustion. Now get out of my sight, before I forget we share blood and have you thrown out of town. Oliver's face crumpled like wet paper. For a moment he looked like he might argue, might plead, might fall to his knees and beg forgiveness. Instead he turned and stumbled out of the alley, the cane clicking against stone, disappearing into the rain-soaked afternoon like a ghost fading into mist. Clara sagged against the wall and pressed both hands to her face. Her shoulders shook, but when she lowered her hands, her eyes were dry, her jaw set with determination. I'm sorry you had to see that, she said to Neshoba. I have seen worse. I believe you. She studied his face, taking in the scars that marked him, the puckered line across his left temple from a saber cut at Sand Creek, the network of smaller scars on his hands from years of hard living, the haunted quality in his dark eyes that survivors recognized in each other, like members of a secret society. You're the scout, the translator, Neshoba. Yes. I've seen you at the post. Heard you speak Cheyenne to the chiefs when they come for parley. The soldiers seem to trust you. She paused, watching him carefully. Should they? It was a bold question, the kind that could get both of them killed if overheard by the wrong person. Neshoba considered his answer, carefully weighing what she needed to hear against what was safe to say. They trust me to do what I am paid to do. Translate their words accurately, scout their trails, stand between them and the tribes when negotiations are needed. He met her eyes directly. What I do beyond that, what I think about what they ask me to do, that is my business. Clara nodded slowly, and something shifted in her expression. Trust, perhaps, or the desperate hope that she had not just made a terrible mistake in being honest with him. Then maybe you'll help me, she said, with my business. What business? She reached beneath her shawl with her uninjured hand and pulled out a folded piece of paper, damp from the rain, but still legible. She spread it on the crate between them with the care of someone handling something precious. It was a map hand-drawn in precise ink lines, showing the layout of Shadow Lake, the buildings, the streets, and beneath them, traced in fainter lines, a network that snaked through the earth like veins beneath skin. The St. Agnes mine, Neshoba said, recognizing the pattern immediately. The silver mine under the lake. Yes. Clara traced the tunnels with her bandaged finger, her touch gentle on the paper. Most of it's flooded now, abandoned for 20 years since the silver played out. But there's a cross-cut passage that runs from the south end of town all the way to the Willow Marsh on the far shore. 2 miles through the mountain. And according to a prospector I paid to check it 3 weeks ago, it's still dry and passable if you know what you're doing and don't mind tight spaces. How much did you pay this prospector? $50. Every spare penny I had at the time. Yuffs. Clara looked up at him. There's a boy locked in the militia storehouse. Cheyenne, 14 years old. They say he killed a freighter in a brawl outside my saloon 3 weeks ago, stabbed him with a skinning knife. But I was there that night. I saw what really happened. The freighter was drunk and angry, looking for a fight. He attacked the boy's uncle with a broken bottle, went after him like a rabid dog. The boy was defending his family. It was self-defense, clear as day to anyone who was watching. Neshoba felt something cold settle in his chest, spreading outward like frost. Why have you not told the soldiers what you saw? Because the freighter was friends with Lieutenant Kruger. Because Kruger has already decided the boy is guilty and is just waiting for the pass to open so he can transport him south to the territorial prison. Clara's voice was hard as iron, now all softness gone. The boy won't survive that journey. Kruger will make sure of it. An accident on the trail, a fall from a horse, a convenient escape attempt that ends with a bullet in the back. Something that looks innocent, but ends with a dead Indian and no inconvenient witnesses. Neshoba knew she was right. He had seen it happen before, had been forced to translate the lies that covered up murders, had stood silent, while injustice was dressed up and called justice by men who knew the words meant nothing. Each time he told himself he had no choice, that speaking out would only get him killed and help no one. Each time it ate away at something inside him, something he could not afford to lose, but was losing anyway, piece by piece. "What do you want from me?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Help me get him out, through the mine tunnels to his people waiting on the other side." Clara folded the map carefully, her movements precise, despite the pain she must be in. "I have supplies cached at the entrance. I have a key to the storehouse that I bribed Ephraim Keats $200 to copy from the militia's master set. I have everything planned down to the smallest detail. But I need someone who knows those tunnels, someone who can guide us through in the dark. And I need someone the boy will trust when we tell him to come with us. Because if we're caught, Kruger will hang all of us before sunrise." "Why are you doing this?" Neshoba asked. You don't know the boy. You have no connection to him. No. But I know what it's like to be helpless. To be at the mercy of people who don't care if you live or die as long as you're convenient. Her hand moved unconsciously to her belly again, that protective gesture. And I know what it's like to need someone, anyone, to take a risk for you when they have every reason not to. To need someone to see you as human when everyone else sees you as a problem to be solved or eliminated. Neshoba looked at her, this white woman with bruises on her face and secrets in her belly, who was willing to risk everything for a child she had no connection to, beyond witnessing an injustice and refusing to look away. He thought about his grandmother, who had taught him that the only way to stay human in an inhuman world was to act human, to choose compassion, even when survival counseled otherwise, to do what was right, even when it cost everything. He thought about Sand Creek, about the children who had died, while soldiers who should have protected them instead slaughtered them like animals. About the guilt he carried every day for surviving when so many did not. About the debt he could never repay, but kept trying to anyway, one small act of defiance at a time. He made his choice. I will help, he said. But first I need to see the boy. I need to know what condition he is in, whether he can even make the journey you are planning. Clara's shoulders sagged with relief, so profound it seemed to take all the strength from her body. Thank you. Thank you so. Don't thank me yet. We might both hang for this. Neshoba stood and offered her his hand. She took it, and he felt the tremor of exhaustion and pain in her grip as he helped her to her feet. When did you last eat? This morning, maybe. I don't remember. You need food and rest. You are no good to anyone if you collapse. He steadied her when she swayed his hand on her elbow, firm but gentle. Go upstairs to your rooms. Eat something. Try to sleep for a few hours. I will go to the post and see the boy, find out what we are dealing with. We meet back here at midnight to finalize the plan. Clara nodded and then looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Gratitude, yes, but something else beneath it. A kind of desperate hope that she had finally found an ally in a world that seemed determined to crush her. Be careful. Kruger is dangerous, smarter than he looks, meaner than most people realize. If he suspects what you're doing, I have been dealing with dangerous white men my entire life, Neshoba said quietly. I know how to stay alive. He left her in the alley and walked back out into the rain, his mind already working through the details of what they were about to attempt. The risks were enormous, betraying the militia that employed him, helping a prisoner escape, all to save a boy he had never met. The chance of success was small. The consequences of failure would be measured in graves. But for the first time in 19 years since the morning, he had returned to Sand Creek and found his people massacred and mutilated, left to rot in the winter sun like they were nothing. Neshoba felt something other than the numb resignation that had carried him through each day, like a ghost walking through a world that held no meaning. He felt purpose. The militia post at twilight was a study in imposed order, fighting a losing battle against the chaos of the frontier. Neat rows of whitewashed buildings lined up like soldiers on parade, surrounded by the sprawling disorder of Shadow Lake, with its crooked streets and ramshackle structures. Neshoba approached from the south, his steps measured and deliberate, his posture, projecting the casual confidence of a man who belonged exactly where he was and had every right to be there. The storehouse sat behind the main barracks, a squat log structure with a heavy timber door reinforced with iron straps and two narrow windows set high in the walls, too small for a man to squeeze through. A lantern hung beside the door, casting a pool of yellow light into the gathering dusk. Corporal Hart stood guard, a heavy-set man with a pockmarked face and the dull eyes of someone who had long since stopped questioning orders or thinking about what they meant. Hart straightened when he saw Neshoba approaching his hand, moving unconsciously to the pistol at his belt before he recognized the scout. "Neshoba, you're out late. Something wrong. Captain wants me to question the prisoner." Neshoba pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket blank. But Hart would not check closely in the dim light, and even if he did, he could barely read. "See if he will talk about accomplices now that he has had time to think about his situation. See if fear has loosened his tongue." Hart squinted at the paper without really reading it, then shrugged. "Don't see why it matters. Indian's gonna hang either way once the pass opens. But orders are orders, I guess." He pulled a large iron key from his belt and unlocked the door. The hinges groaned as it swung open, releasing a gust of stale air that smelled of unwashed bodies, damp wood, and something else, the metallic tang of blood and the sour smell of infection. "Make it quick. I need to take a piss, and I ain't leaving this door unlocked with you in there." 5 minutes. That is all I need." Hart pushed the door wider and gestured Neshoba inside, then headed around the corner of the building without bothering to lock it behind him. Through the gap, Neshoba could hear the corporal relieving himself against the wall, muttering to himself about the cold and the wet and the thanklessness of guard duty. The interior of the storehouse was dim, lit only by faint gray light filtering through the high windows. Neshoba stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom, cataloging the space, with the automatic thoroughness of someone who had learned that survival often depended on knowing your environment better than your enemies did. Sacks of grain and flour lined one wall, stacked haphazardly. Coils of rope hung from the rafters like sleeping serpents. Broken equipment lay scattered in corners, a wheelbarrow, with one wheel missing a shovel with a cracked handle, a rusted bear trap with one jaw broken. And in the far corner, barely visible in the shadows, chained by one ankle to a thick support post, sat a boy. He looked up as Neshoba approached, and even in the poor light, Neshoba could see the damage the soldiers had inflicted. The boy's face was a landscape of bruises, purple and yellow and green, layered like sediment, telling the story of multiple beatings over days or weeks. His left eye was swollen, nearly shut, the flesh around it puffy and discolored. His lower lip was split and scabbed over. And his left arm hung at an angle that made Neshoba's own shoulder ache in sympathy, the joint clearly dislocated. Neshoba felt rage kindle in his chest, cold and deadly. But he pushed it down with the practice of years and knelt beside the boy, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. "I am called Neshoba," he said quietly in Cheyenne, his voice pitched low so it would not carry beyond the walls. "I work for the militia as a translator, but I am Cheyenne. I have come to help you if I can." The boy studied Neshoba's face with his one good eye, searching for deception or false hope, or any of the 1,000 ways adults had of lying to children. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse from disuse or screaming or both. "Why would you help me? You work for them. You are one of them now. I work for silver coin that lets me eat and have a roof over my head. But I am still Cheyenne, in my heart and my blood." Neshoba examined the boy's shoulder with gentle hands, feeling the displaced joint, the swelling, the heat that meant infection had already begun its deadly work. "What is your name?" "Little Hawk, of the Sweetwater Band." Neshoba's hands went still. The Sweetwater Band. Red Knife's band. His uncle's band. He looked at the boy more closely now, seeing past the injuries to the shape of his face, the proud set of his jaw even in pain, the scar on his left cheek from some childhood accident. Recognition hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. "You are Red Knife's grandson," he said slowly, his voice tight. "You are my nephew." Little Hawk's good eye widened. You know my grandfather. He is my uncle, my mother's brother, which makes you... Neshoba felt something crack inside him, some wall he had built after Sand Creek to protect himself from caring too much, suddenly showing deep fissures. When I left the band 5 years ago to take this work, you were only 9 years old. Too young to remember me clearly. No. Little Hawk's voice broke slightly, and Neshoba saw tears gathering in his eyes and the first crack in the brave face the boy had been holding. I remember. You are the one who speaks the white man's tongue like it is your own, the one who survived the Sand Creek massacre when so many died. My grandfather speaks of you often. He says you walk between two worlds and belong fully to neither, and that it is a hard path that will break most men. The words were too accurate to be comfortable cutting too close to truths Neshoba had been avoiding for years. He pushed the discomfort aside and focused on the immediate problem, the dislocated shoulder that would have to be reset before they could move the boy anywhere. Your shoulder is badly injured. It will have to be reset before we can get you out of here, and I will not lie to you. It is going to hurt worse than anything you have ever felt. Can you stay quiet while I do it? Can you keep from screaming? Why does it matter if I scream? Little Hawk's face was pale beneath the bruises, but his voice was steady. Because tonight, we are getting you out of here, through the mine tunnels that run under the lake. But if the soldiers hear you scream when I reset your shoulder, they will come running, and we will all die. Neshoba pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket. Chew this willow bark. It will take some of the edge off the pain, not much, but some. Little Hawk took the bark and chewed obediently, his face twisting at the bitter taste. Who else is coming? Who else is helping? A white woman named Clara Pike. She runs the saloon. She saw what really happened the night the freighter died. She knows you were defending your uncle, that it was not murder. Neshoba heard footsteps outside Hart returning. He squeezed Little Hawk's good shoulder. Tonight, be ready. When we come for you, do not make a sound. Do not fight us, just come quickly and quietly. Understand? Little Hawk nodded, his jaw set with determination that reminded Neshoba painfully of his grandmother, who had possessed that same stubborn courage. Neshoba stood and moved to the door just as it opened. Hart stuck his head in, scratching his belly and yawning. Learn anything useful from the little savage? Not yet. Fear has his tongue tied tight. But I will try again tomorrow, see if another night in here softens him up. Neshoba kept his voice neutral, his face expressionless. Waste of time, you ask me. Hart yawned again, showing yellowed teeth. Indian will hang either way soon as the pass clears. Why bother asking questions? But I guess the captain wants to make it look official, like we followed proper procedure. He laughed, a harsh sound. As if procedure matters for an Indian who killed a white man. Neshoba said nothing. He simply nodded and walked away before Hart could see the rage that must show in his eyes, the fury that made his hands shake and his heart pound. A boy, his nephew, beaten and chained like an animal waiting to die for the crime of defending his family. And these men, these soldiers who claimed to represent justice and civilization, saw nothing wrong with it. Neshoba had spent 19 years swallowing his anger, bending his neck, surviving by staying silent and invisible. Tonight, that silence would end. He found Clara waiting in the alley behind the last light, exactly where they had agreed to meet. She had changed into men's clothing, dark wool trousers, a heavy coat that hid her shape boots, suitable for rough terrain. Her hair was pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat. In the moonlight, filtering through the scattered clouds, she could almost pass for a slender young man, if no one looked too closely. But she was not alone. Beside her stood a small figure wrapped in a quilt, and Neshoba's heart sank as he recognized the child, Jamie Clara's nephew, the 5-year-old boy who lived upstairs above the saloon, and who had asthma that worsened in cold or damp weather. "And what is he doing here?" Neshoba asked quietly, keeping his voice level despite the alarm bells ringing in his mind. Clara's jaw was tight, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and worry. "I couldn't leave him. My father came back an hour ago, drunk and raving about how I had shamed him in front of the whole town, how he was going to make things right. He tried to break down the door to my rooms, tried to get to Jamie. If I had left the boy alone..." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. They both knew what Oliver Pike might do in a drunken rage. "He will slow us down significantly." "I know. But he is small, and he is tougher than he looks, and I have absolutely no choice." Clara's voice was steady despite the fear Neshoba could see in her eyes. "We bring him, or we don't go. Those are the only options." Neshoba looked at the boy. Jamie stared back with solemn dark eyes that were far too old for his age, far too familiar with fear and uncertainty. He clutched a carved wooden horse in one hand, held it like a talisman against the darkness. The child had not said a word, but Neshoba could see the tremor in his small frame, could hear the slight wheeze in his breathing that suggested his lungs were already struggling with the cold, damp air. "Can you be very quiet?" Neshoba asked Jamie, crouching down to the boy's level. "Even if you are scared, even if things happen that frighten you badly." Jamie nodded, his grip tightening on the wooden horse. "Can you walk a long way in the dark without complaining, even if you are tired and cold and want to stop?" Another nod, this one more emphatic. "Good." Neshoba placed a hand on the boy's small shoulder. "Then you stay close to your Aunt Clara at all times, and you do exactly what we tell you the moment we tell you. If we say stop, you stop immediately. If we say run, you run as fast as you can. If we say hide, you hide, and do not make a single sound, no matter what you hear or see. Can you do all that?" "Yes, sir." Jamie's voice was barely a whisper, but it was firm, steady. "I can do it. I won't let Aunt Clara down." "I know you will not." Neshoba stood and looked at Clara. She had a canvas pack slung over her shoulder, bulging with supplies. The shepherd dog sat at her feet, panting softly, its eyes alert and intelligent. "You saw the boy in the storehouse, Little Hawk?" "Yes. His shoulder is badly dislocated. He will need help walking, and the pain will be significant even after I reset it." Neshoba felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. "And his name is Little Hawk. He is my nephew, my uncle's grandson. I did not know he was here, did not know he had been arrested." Clara's eyes widened with surprise, and something else, understanding perhaps, of why this rescue had become even more personal for Neshoba. "Then we have even more reason to make sure this works." "Yes." Neshoba studied her face in the moonlight, seeing the determination there, the courage that had brought her to this moment. "Are you certain you want to do this? Once we start, there is no turning back. If we are caught, I know what happens if we are caught. Kruger will hang us before sunrise and call it justice." Clara's voice was steady, but Neshoba could see her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the pack on her shoulder. "But I also know what happens if we do nothing. A boy dies, an innocent boy, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life, knowing I could have helped and chose not to because I was afraid." She looked at him directly. "I won't do that. I can't. Not anymore." Neshoba felt something shift in his chest, some recognition that he had found someone who understood the same truth he had learned at Sand Creek, that surviving was not enough, that you had to be able to live with yourself after survival, and some things made that impossible. "Then we go," he said. "Now, before I lose the courage you have somehow given me." They waited in the alley pressed against the wall, where shadows pooled deepest as midnight approached with agonizing slowness. Jamie sat on a crate, hugging his wooden horse, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but determined to stay awake. The shepherd dog lay at his feet, its body warmth helping to keep the child from shivering in the cold night air. Clara stood beside Neshoba, close enough that he could feel the tension radiating from her body in waves. "I'm terrified," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the distant sounds of the town, settling into uneasy sleep. "I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, all the things I haven't planned for. Fear is good. Fear keeps you careful, keeps you from making stupid mistakes." Neshoba glanced at her. "Is that something you learned running a saloon in a town like this?" "No. That's something I learned from my mother before she died. She always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was doing what needed to be done, despite the fear trying to stop you." "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. She also died too young trying to help a neighbor during a difficult childbirth. Bled out because the doctor was drunk and couldn't help her." Clara's voice was tight with old grief. "That's when I learned that doing the right thing doesn't guarantee a happy ending, but it's still the right thing." Before Neshoba could respond, then they heard shouts from the south end of town. "Fire, fire at the Bramble place." Within seconds, boots pounded past the alley as soldiers ran toward the source of the commotion. Neshoba saw flames leaping into the night sky, Tom Bramble's hay barn burning with dramatic intensity. Controlled, though. Bramble knew what he was doing, creating maximum visible smoke and flame with minimum actual danger. "That's our signal," Clara said. "Hart will have to respond along with everyone else. This is our chance." They moved quickly through the darkened streets, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the pools of light cast by windows and doorways. The storehouse was unguarded now, Hart having joined the other soldiers, fighting the fire that threatened or appeared to threaten to spread to nearby buildings. Neshoba pulled out the brass key Clara had given him and tried it in the lock with hands that were surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The key fit. He turned it carefully, and the lock clicked open with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. Inside, Little Hawk was already standing, or trying to stand, the chain pulled taut. His face was tight with pain and anticipation, his good eye wide and alert, despite the obvious exhaustion and suffering. Neshoba crossed to him in 3 quick strides and knelt by the padlock that secured the chain to the post. He pulled out the second key, the one for standard militia padlocks, and inserted it with a prayer to spirits he was not sure he believed in anymore. The lock opened. Relief flooded through Neshoba so intensely it left him dizzy. He helped Little Hawk to his feet, steadying the boy when he swayed dangerously. "Can you walk at all?" "I can try, Uncle." Little Hawk's voice was weak but determined. They made it to the door, and Neshoba locked it behind them, carefully pocketing both keys. If they were lucky, if luck meant anything, in a world this cruel, no one would notice. Little Hawk was gone until morning shift change. That would give them several hours head start. Clara and Jamie were waiting where he had left them. Clara's eyes widened when she saw Little Hawk saw the extent of his injuries illuminated by moonlight, but she said nothing. She simply moved to the boy's other side, and together she and Neshoba supported him as they headed south toward the mine entrance. Jamie trotted along beside them with the shepherd dog at his heels, both moving with the quiet efficiency of survivors who understood instinctively that silence meant safety. They had made it 3 blocks that felt like 3 miles, every shadow, a potential threat, every sound a possible alarm, when a voice called out from behind them. "Clara, stop right there." It was Oliver Pike. He stumbled out of a doorway, his cane clicking on the cobblestones, his face slack with drink, but his eyes sharp with something that might have been fear or desperation or both. Clara froze, her entire body going rigid. "Father, what are you doing here?" I could ask you the same thing. Oliver's gaze moved from Clara to Neshoba to Little Hawk to Jamie, cataloging the scene with the awful clarity that sometimes comes to drunks in moments of crisis. "You're running. Taking the boy, both boys, and running. I knew it. I knew you were planning something like this when I saw you with Keats." "Then why did you come?" Clara's voice was cold as winter ice. "To stop me, to turn us in, to warn you." Oliver took a step closer, and Neshoba shifted his weight, instinctively ready to put himself between Clara and her father, if needed. "Lieutenant Kruger came to see me 2 hours ago. He knows about the money you gave Keats. Knows you've been planning something. He told me..." Oliver's voice broke. "He told me if I didn't tell him what you were doing, he would take Jamie. Put him in an orphanage out in Cheyenne where you would never find him. Said he had the legal authority because you're not the boy's real parent, just his aunt." Clara went very still in a way that frightened Neshoba more than anger would have. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing. Not yet." Oliver looked down at his hands, as if surprised to find them empty, except for the cane. "But Clara, he's dangerous. More dangerous than you know. The things he's involved in, if you cross him, if you run with that Indian boy Kruger, will hunt you down like animals. He'll kill you, all of you. And there won't be anything I can do to stop it. Then I guess we'd better make sure he doesn't catch us." Clara's voice was steady, now resolved. "Thank you for the warning, Father. Now go home and forget you saw us. Come with me instead. Please." Oliver's voice cracked with something that might have been genuine emotion beneath the alcohol-soaked desperation. "We'll find another way. A legal way. I'll testify about what you saw that night. Your testimony is worth nothing, and you know it." Clara pulled Jamie closer to her side in a protective gesture. "You're a drunk who owes money to the very men who want this boy dead. No court would believe you over Kruger, and even if they did, it wouldn't matter. Kruger would kill Little Hawk before we ever got to trial." Oliver stood there swaying slightly, his face crumpling like paper in a fire. "I'm sorry. For everything. For being a terrible father. For the drinking. For this." He gestured at her bruised face. "I never meant I just wanted. I know what you wanted. You wanted me to fix all your problems, to save you from yourself, to make everything magically better while you did nothing." Clara's voice was hard, but not cruel, just exhausted. "But I can't save you, Father. I can only save them." She nodded toward the boys. "Now go home. Forget you saw us tonight. And pray that when this is over, I can find it in my heart to forgive you. But I wouldn't count on it." Oliver stood there for a long moment, his mouth working soundlessly. Then he turned and stumbled back into the darkness, his cane tapping out a broken rhythm on the stones that faded gradually until it was swallowed by the night. They ran. The mine entrance was a dark wound in the hillside south of town, surrounded by rusted equipment that gleamed dully in the moonlight, and the skeletal remains of ore carts, the broken spine of a sluice, piles of tailings that had been picked over by scavengers until nothing of value remained. Someone had cut the chain that sealed the entrance Clara's work from earlier in the day. They slipped through the gap one by one and into the mountain's throat. Clara lit a candle with shaking hands, striking the match 3 times before it caught. The small flame pushed back the darkness just enough to reveal a tunnel that descended into the earth at a gentle but inexorable angle. The walls were rough stone, and the ceiling was supported by timbers that looked far too old and fragile to be holding up tons of rock overhead. "Stay close." Clara said, her voice tight with tension. The passage is stable for the first half-mile, according to the prospector I hired. After that, she did not finish the sentence. They descended into darkness that seemed almost alive, pressing in from all sides like a physical presence. The candle flame danced with their movement, casting wild shadows that stretched and contracted on the stone walls like living things. Jamie held Clara's hand tightly, his wooden horse clutched in the other. Little Hawk leaned heavily on Neshoba, his breathing labored each step, clearly costing him enormous effort. The shepherd dog ranged ahead a few yards, its instincts sharper than any human's, its nose leading them forward. The temperature dropped rapidly as they went deeper, the air growing damp and cold enough to make their breath visible in the candlelight. Water dripped steadily from unseen sources above the sound, echoing off stone, until it seemed like the mountain itself was weeping for all the men who had died in its depths, chasing dreams of silver. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Neshoba's internal sense of direction, honed by years of scouting and tracking, began to trouble him. Something was wrong with the passage they were following. The angle was changing, becoming steeper, and there was a smell in the air that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Stop," he said quietly. Clara stopped immediately, turning to look at him with wide eyes. "What is it?" "Something is wrong. This passage," Neshoba sniffed the air carefully. "Do you smell that?" Clara inhaled deeply, then her face went pale. "Rotten eggs. That's bad gas, isn't it? My father used to work in coal mines back east. He said the smell of rotten eggs meant dangerous gas building up. Methane or sulfur compounds. Neshoba had learned about mine gases during his brief stint working at St. Agnes years ago before he took the job with the militia. If we keep going forward and hit a pocket of it with an open flame. He did not need to finish. They all understood what happened when flame met explosive gas in an enclosed space. "We have to go back," Clara said. "Find another route." But before they could turn around, they heard voices echoing down the tunnel behind them. Men's voices, soldiers' voices growing closer. "They followed us in." Little Hawk whispered, his face gray with pain and fear. Neshoba pressed his ear to the stone wall, trying to gauge distance through the distorting acoustics of the mine. The soldiers were still in the first section of tunnel, perhaps 10 minutes behind, moving faster than he had expected. Someone Hart probably had discovered Little Hawk's absence earlier than anticipated and organized a pursuit with terrifying efficiency. "We can't go back," Neshoba said. "And we can't go forward into the gas. So we go." He looked around desperately, his eyes finally catching on a side passage he had almost missed, a narrow opening barely visible in the candlelight. There. That tunnel wasn't on the map, which means it could lead nowhere. But it's our only option. They took the side passage, moving as quickly as Little Hawk's injuries and Jamie's short legs would allow. The passage was narrower than the main tunnel, barely wide enough for Neshoba's shoulders, and the ceiling pressed down so low they had to hunch over to avoid hitting their heads on rough stone. After 50 feet, the passage opened into a small chamber. And in that chamber, illuminated by Clara's flickering candle, was a sight that made Neshoba's heart sink a deadfall, where the ceiling had partially collapsed, blocking the way forward with tons of broken rock and shattered timber. "No," Clara breathed. "No, no, no, this can't be." But even as she spoke, Neshoba saw at a gap in the deadfall low to the ground, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through if they were willing to crawl on their belly through tight darkness with thousands of pounds of unstable rock overhead. "There," he said, pointing. "It's small, but it might lead through to the other side of the collapse. Or it might lead to a solid wall after 10 feet of crawling." Clara's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Or the whole thing might collapse on us while we're in there. This is insane." "Yes, but it's also our only chance." Neshoba could hear the soldiers getting closer, their voices louder now. "I'll go first, make sure it's passable. If I make it through, I'll call back and you send Jamie, then Little Hawk, then you follow." "What about the dog?" "The dog will have to take its chances finding another way or going back." Neshoba handed Clara his rifle. "If I don't come back in 5 minutes, take the boys and try to hide in one of these side chambers. Wait until the soldiers pass, then backtrack and find another route." Clara grabbed his arm before he could move toward the gap. "Neshoba, if you don't come back, then you do whatever you have to do to keep those boys alive." He covered her hand with his briefly. "That is all that matters now." He pulled away before she could respond and approached the gap in the deadfall. It was even smaller up close than it had looked from across the chamber, barely 18 inches high, maybe 2 feet wide, and he had no idea how far it went or what was on the other side. He lay down on his belly and began to crawl. The rock pressed in from all sides, immediately crushing, suffocating. He could not raise his head without striking stone, could not move his elbows more than a few inches, could barely breathe with the weight of the mountain pressing down on him from above. The darkness was absolute. He had left the candle with Clara, and now he moved through blackness, so complete it was like being blind. He crawled forward, inches at a time, feeling his way with his hands, trying not to think about what would happen if the deadfall shifted, if the gap closed, if he got stuck halfway through and could neither advance nor retreat. Tried not to think about being buried alive in the darkness, slowly suffocating while the rock pressed the life from his lungs. His hand hit something not rock but empty air. He reached further and felt nothing, just open space beyond the gap. He had made it through. Neshoba pulled himself forward with his arms ignoring the pain as rock scraped skin from his elbows and back, and emerged into another passage on the far side of the collapse. He stood shakily, his heart pounding his breath, coming in gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the primal fear of enclosed spaces and crushing weight. "I'm through," he called back. "Send Jamie next." There was a moment of muffled conversation, and then Jamie's small form appeared at the opening. The boy was crying silently, tears streaming down his face, but he crawled forward with determination, his wooden horse clutched in his teeth. Neshoba reached in and grabbed the boy's arms, pulling him through the last few feet. Jamie collapsed against him, shaking violently. "I don't like it in there. I don't like the dark." "I know. You were very brave." Neshoba held the boy for a moment, then set him aside gently. "Little Hawk next." Getting Little Hawk through was harder. The boy could barely use his arms to pull himself forward, and the pain of crawling with a dislocated shoulder was clearly excruciating. Halfway through, he stopped, and Neshoba could hear him gasping. Could hear Clara on the other side, encouraging him, pleading with him to keep moving. "I can't," Little Hawk gasped. "Uncle, I can't." "Yes, you can." Neshoba reached into the gap as far as he could, his hand finding Little Hawk's good arm. "You are the grandson of Red Knife, the nephew of Neshoba, the son of a warrior line that goes back 100 generations. You do not give up. You do not stop. You crawl forward, even if it kills you, because that is what our people do. We survive." Little Hawk made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Then he began crawling forward again, inch by agonizing inch, until Neshoba could grab him properly and pull him through. The boy collapsed on the stone floor, his face slick with sweat and tears, his breathing ragged. But he was through. "Your turn," Neshoba called to Clara. "The dog won't go through." Clara's voice was tight with frustration. "It's too scared of the tight space. Leave it, we don't have time." But the decision was made for them. They heard shouts from the chamber on the other side. The soldiers had arrived. There was the crack of a rifle shot, then another. Then Clara was diving through the gap, crawling with desperate speed as bullets whined through the darkness behind her. Neshoba grabbed her arms and hauled her through just as a bullet struck the rock, inches from the gap, spraying stone fragments. Clara tumbled into his arms, and for a moment they were pressed together in the darkness, her heart hammering against his chest, his arms around her in pure instinct. Then she pulled back, gasping. "They're right behind us. We have to..." "The gap is too small for Hart. He's too big to fit through." Neshoba listened to the soldiers on the other side, cursing and shouting. "They'll have to find another way around. That buys us time." "How much time?" "Maybe 20 minutes if we're lucky. Less if they know these tunnels better than I think they do." Neshoba helped Clara to her feet. "Can you light the candle again? We need to keep moving." Clara's hands were shaking so badly, it took her 4 tries to strike a match. But finally the candle flame caught, pushing back the darkness enough to see. They were in a passage similar to the main tunnel, sloping steadily downward, water trickling along one wall. "Which way?" Clara asked. Neshoba closed his eyes and tried to picture the map, tried to orient himself based on the direction they had been traveling and the distance they had covered. This should be running parallel to the main crosscut passage. If we follow it downward, it should eventually connect back to the route we need. Should. Nothing is certain in a mine that's been abandoned for 20 years. Neshoba picked up Jamie, settling the boy on his hip to make faster progress. But staying here is certain death, so we move forward and hope. They moved deeper into the mountain, following the passage. As it twisted and turned, rose and fell. The water that had been trickling along the wall became a stream, then began to spread across the floor, rising from ankle-deep to knee-deep to thigh-deep. The cold was immediate and brutal, stealing the breath from their lungs and the strength from their muscles with shocking speed. Neshoba felt Jamie begin to shake violently in his arms, and the boy's breathing taking on the whistling quality that signaled his asthma was worsening. Clara and Little Hawk were not much better, both of them shivering so hard their teeth rattled, their movements becoming sluggish and uncoordinated as hypothermia began to set in. They needed warmth, needed to stop and dry off before the cold killed them more surely than any bullet. But the soldiers were behind them, and stopping meant capture or death. "Keep moving," Neshoba urged, though his own lips were numb and his words slurred. "Not much farther. Has to connect soon." But the water kept rising, waist-deep on Neshoba and Clara, chest-deep on Little Hawk, who was shorter. The current was gentle but persistent, tugging at their legs, trying to knock them off balance. Clara's candle flickered dangerously, threatening to go out and leave them in absolute darkness. And then ahead, Neshoba saw it, the passage opening into a larger space, where the water level dropped sharply. They pushed forward with renewed desperation and climbed up onto relatively dry stone, all of them shaking so violently they could barely stand. They had reached the pump room, the vast chamber Clara had marked on the map, with its enormous wooden water wheel and the narrow ledge that was their only way across. But the map had not shown the full reality of what 20 years of abandonment had done to this place. The ledge was not just narrow, it was crumbling in places, with chunks missing the stone, eroded by constant moisture. Below it, the black water looked deep and cold, filled with floating debris, broken timbers, pieces of machinery, things too waterlogged and dark to identify. And worse, much worse, they could hear voices echoing through the passages behind them. The soldiers had found another route. They were close now, very close. "We have to cross," Clara said through chattering teeth. "Right now, there's no other way. I will go first with Jamie." Neshoba set the boy down carefully. "Little Hawk, you stay in the middle where I can help you if you slip. Clara, you come last." "No." Clara's voice was firm despite her shaking. You go first with Jamie, yes. But I go second, and Little Hawk goes third. That way, if he slips, I'm between him and the fall. I can catch him. Clara, we don't have time to argue. Clara was already stepping onto the ledge, her back pressed against the wall. Jamie, stay right in front of me. Put your hands on the wall and slide your feet sideways. Do not look down. Neshoba wanted to argue, wanted to insist on a different order. But Clara was right, and they had no time. He could hear the soldiers very close now, perhaps just one chamber away. He stepped onto the ledge with Jamie pressed against his chest, the boy's arms locked around his neck in a grip that would have been painful if Neshoba could feel anything through the cold. He moved sideways, his back to the wall, his feet sliding carefully from one hold to the next. The stone was slick with moisture, treacherous, and twice his foot slipped, and his heart stopped before he caught himself. But he made it halfway across before disaster struck. Behind him, he heard Clara gasp, heard the scrape of boots on stone. He turned his head just in time to see her lose her balance, her feet sliding on the crumbling ledge. She tilted backward, her arms, windmilling, her eyes wide with terror. Little Hawk, moving behind her, reached out instinctively with his good arm and grabbed her coat. The movement saved her from falling, but sent searing pain through his injured shoulder. He cried out a sharp sound he could not suppress, and the cry echoed through the chamber like a bell. The soldiers burst into the pump room at that exact moment. There were 4 of them, led by Corporal Hart, all carrying torches that filled the space with orange light and dancing shadows. They stopped at the entrance, taking in the scene Neshoba and Jamie, halfway across the ledge, Clara and Little Hawk, still near the starting point, all of them trapped and exposed. Hart raised his rifle and aimed it directly at Little Hawk. End of the line, Scout. Nowhere left to run. Neshoba's hand went to his own rifle, but it was slung across his back, and he could not reach it without dropping Jamie or falling from the ledge. He was trapped helpless, watching as Hart's finger tightened on the trigger. Wait! Clara's voice rang out clear and strong across the chamber. Don't shoot. I have something you want. Hart's finger paused on the trigger. What could you possibly have that I want, Miss Pike? Proof. Clara pulled the ledger from inside her coat with her free hand and held it up so the torchlight caught it. Every illegal deal, every bribe, every stolen acre of land. 3 years of evidence that will hang Kruger and everyone who helped him, including you, Corporal. Hart's face went pale, then flushed dark red. Put that away. Whatever you think you know. I know you helped Kruger steal land from the Arapaho. I know you were there the night 3 prospectors disappeared after they found gold on what Kruger claimed was his property. I know you've been taking bribes from Ephraim Keats to look the other way, while he launders Kruger's money through the bank. Clara's voice was steady, each word a hammer blow. It's all in here, Corporal. Dates, amounts, witnesses. Everything. Uncertainty flickered across Hart's face. He glanced at the other soldiers who were now looking at each other with worried expressions. You're lying. You got nothing but speculation and gossip. Then why are you here? Clara challenged. Why did Kruger send you after us so fast? Why does he care so much about one Indian boy? She paused, then added, It's not about the boy at all, is it? It's about what the boy saw. What his uncle saw before Kruger had him killed. The land surveys that prove Kruger's claims are fraudulent. Hart's face confirmed the truth of her words, even before he spoke. Give me that ledger. Now. And maybe the lieutenant will let you live. No. Clara held the ledger out over the water. You let us go, all of us, and the ledger survives to be delivered to the territorial judge. You try to stop us, and I drop it. And without it, you have no way to know what evidence I've already sent to Laramie, what copies exist, who else knows the truth. It was a bluff, Neshoba could see that. Clara had not sent copies anywhere, had not told anyone else the full truth. But Hart could not be sure of that, and the doubt showed in his face. For a long moment, silence hung over the pump room like a held breath. The only sounds were the drip of water and the crackling of the soldiers' torches and Neshoba's own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Then Hart made his decision. Shoot them, all of them. Recover the ledger from the water. The soldiers raised their rifles. Neshoba made a choice. He shoved Jamie into a small alcove in the rock wall, a tiny space barely big enough for the boy, and drew his own rifle in one smooth motion. He fired at the ceiling above the soldiers' heads. The bullet struck stone and ricocheted, striking one of the torch holders in the shoulder. The man screamed and dropped his torch, which fell into the water with a hiss. In the chaos that followed, Clara made her move. She pulled Little Hawk back from the ledge and pushed him into another alcove, then turned and did something that made Neshoba's heart stop. She stepped off the ledge deliberately, dropping into the black water below. No. The cry was ripped from Neshoba's throat before he could stop it. But Clara did not sink. The water was not as deep as it looked, only 4 feet or so where she had jumped. She waded toward the far side of the chamber, the ledger held high above her head, moving with desperate speed. Hart fired at her. The bullet struck the water inches from her shoulder, sending up a gout of spray. She did not slow down. Neshoba fired again, this time aiming for Hart. The bullet struck the corporal in the same shoulder where he had been hit before, spinning him around. Hart went down hard, his rifle clattering away across the stone floor. The other soldiers returned fire. Bullets whined through the air, striking rock, ricocheting wildly in the enclosed space. One struck the ancient timbers supporting the ceiling. Wood splintered with a crack like thunder. "The supports!" one of the soldiers shouted. "Stop shooting or you'll bring the whole—" His warning came too late. Another bullet struck another timber, and this one gave way completely with a groaning screech. A section of ceiling collapsed, sending tons of rock crashing down into the water, sending a wave surging outward that knocked Clara off her feet. Neshoba watched in horror as she went under the ledger, flying from her hands. For a terrible moment she disappeared beneath the churning black water, and Neshoba thought she was gone, thought she had drowned or been crushed by falling rock. Then her head broke the surface, gasping, coughing. She was on the far side of the chamber now, climbing up onto solid ground. But the ledger was floating in the water behind her, its pages already beginning to scatter in the current. Hart, wounded but not dead, lunged for it from his position on the ground. His hand closed around the leather binding, and for a moment triumph flashed across his face. Then the second section of ceiling collapsed. This time the cave-in was massive, hundreds of tons of rock thundering down, filling the pump room with dust and debris and a roar like the end of the world. Neshoba grabbed Jamie from the alcove and pressed the boy against the wall, his own body shielding the child, as rock rained down around them. When the dust finally settled, the pump room had transformed into something unrecognizable. The center was filled with fallen rock, creating a bridge of sorts across what had been the water. But it had also sealed off the passage the soldiers had come through, trapping Hart and his men on the other side of the collapse, or killing them. Neshoba could not tell through the dust and darkness whether any of the soldiers had survived. "Clara!" he shouted. "Clara, are you there?" "I'm here." Her voice came from the far side of the chamber, weak but alive. "I'm all right, Little Hawk is with me." The ledger, gone, buried under tons of rock, along with Hart and probably the others. Clara's voice was thick with exhaustion and despair. "I'm sorry. I lost it. I lost our only proof. You're alive. That is all that matters." Neshoba set Jamie down and tested the rock pile carefully. It seemed stable enough. The collapse had packed the loose stone tightly. "Can you climb over to this side? The rock makes a bridge now. I think so. Give me a moment. Neshoba heard scrambling sounds, and then Clara appeared at the top of the rock pile with Little Hawk beside her. They looked like ghosts, covered in dust and water, shaking with cold and exhaustion, barely able to stand. But they were alive. They made it across the makeshift bridge one at a time, moving carefully, testing each handhold and footstep. When Clara finally stood on solid ground beside Neshoba, she looked at him with eyes that held too much grief and too little hope. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Without the ledger, we have no proof. Kruger will spin whatever story he wants, and no one will believe us over him." Before Neshoba could answer, Little Hawk spoke up, his young voice stronger than it had any right to be. "The ledger is not gone." They both turned to stare at him. "What do you mean?" Clara asked. Little Hawk pulled something from inside his shirt, a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "When you made me practice crawling through the gap earlier today, while you were setting up supplies, I saw this in your pack. I thought it was important, so I kept it with me." He unwrapped the bundle carefully. It was not the full ledger, but it was the most important 20 pages, the ones Clara had copied and kept separate as insurance. The ones that detailed Kruger's land fraud schemes with dates, amounts, and witnesses clearly documented. Clara stared at the pages with an expression Neshoba could not read. Then she started laughing, a wild, half-hysterical sound that echoed off the stone walls. "You brilliant, wonderful boy. You saved us. You saved everything." Little Hawk managed a weak smile despite his obvious pain. "My grandfather always says to have a backup plan, and a backup for the backup." "Your grandfather is a very wise man," Neshoba said. He wrapped the pages carefully in the oilcloth again and tucked them inside his own shirt. "Now we need to get out of this mountain before it kills us." "Can everyone still walk?" They could barely. They followed a passage that Clara identified from her mental map of the mine, a route that led steadily upward toward the surface. Every step was agony. They were all freezing, exhausted, injured in one way or another. But they kept moving because stopping meant death. After what felt like days, but was probably only an hour, and they saw it, moonlight, filtering down through a gap in the rock ahead. The exit Clara had marked on her map, leading to the willow marsh on the far side of the lake. They stumbled out into cold night air that smelled of pine and freedom and life. Neshoba fell to his knees, Jamie still clutched in his arms, and just breathed for a long moment, grateful to be alive, grateful to see stars overhead instead of crushing stone. Clara collapsed beside him, and Little Hawk sat down heavily, his face gray with exhaustion. They were all shaking violently with cold and shock, their clothes soaked through, their strength nearly gone. But they had made it. Against all odds, they had made it. "Uncle." Little Hawk's voice was weak. "There are riders coming." Neshoba looked up and saw shapes emerging from the willow marsh, warriors on horseback, moving with the easy confidence of men in familiar territory. At their head rode Red Knife, Neshoba's uncle, Little Hawk's grandfather, his weathered face stern in the moonlight. Red Knife dismounted and knelt beside his grandson, his hands gentle as he examined the boy's injuries. Then he looked at Neshoba and nodded once, a gesture that encompassed gratitude, respect, and understanding. "You kept your promise, nephew," Red Knife said in Cheyenne. "You brought my grandson back to me." "We all kept our promises," Neshoba replied, also in Cheyenne. "The woman especially. She risked everything." Red Knife looked at Clara, studying her for a long moment. Then he spoke in careful English. "You have my gratitude, my family's gratitude. If you ever need help, you have only to ask." 2 weeks later in Laramie, the matter came before the territorial court. Clara managed a weak smile. "I may take you up on that. We're not out of danger yet. Kruger will send more men after us. We need to get to Laramie, to the territorial judge. And we need to do it before Kruger can spin his lies and turn the truth into something unrecognizable. Then you will need horses, supplies, a guide who knows the northern trails. Red Knife gestured to his warriors. We can provide all of that. But before they could discuss the details, they heard something that made Neshoba's blood run cold hoofbeats. Multiple horses coming fast from the direction of Shadow Lake. The soldiers, Hart's men or reinforcements Kruger had sent. They had found another way through or around the mine collapse. We need to go, Neshoba said, struggling to his feet. Now. Red Knife's warriors brought horses forward, and they mounted quickly despite their exhaustion. Little Hawk rode with one of the warriors, unable to sit a horse alone with his injured shoulder. Jamie rode with Clara wrapped in her arms. Neshoba took the fastest horse, a gray mare that danced impatiently, eager to run. They rode hard through the night, the Cheyenne warriors forming a protective screen around them. Behind them, Neshoba could hear their pursuers, at least 6 men by the sound of it, maybe more, all riding hard. The chase lasted through what remained of the night and into the gray dawn. They rode through country that grew progressively rougher, high slopes, where one misstep would send horse and rider tumbling to their deaths, narrow trails that wound between towering rock faces, streams swollen with snowmelt that had to be forded at dangerous fords. Twice they had to stop briefly to rest the horses, and each time the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Twice Neshoba considered making a stand, trying to ambush their pursuers in favorable terrain, but each time decided against it. Their first priority was getting Clara and the boys to safety, not winning battles. As the sun rose, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, they reached a place where the trail split. The northern fork led through a canyon that would take them toward Laramie and onward to the territorial capital. The eastern fork led back toward Cheyenne country and relative safety among Red Knife's people. Red Knife pulled his horse up beside Neshoba's. We should split up here. I will take my warriors east and draw the pursuit away from you. You take the woman and the boys north. With luck, the soldiers will follow the larger group us, and you will have a clear run to Laramie. It was sound strategy. It was also incredibly dangerous for Red Knife and his warriors, who would be leading armed soldiers directly toward their camp and families. Uncle, this is not a discussion, nephew. Red Knife's voice was firm but not unkind. My grandson is safe. The woman who saved him must be protected so she can deliver her testimony. And you must see this through to the end. That is your path now. You can no longer walk between two worlds. You must choose. Neshoba understood what his uncle was saying. By helping Clara and Little Hawk, by defying the militia, he had already made his choice, whether he admitted it or not. There was no going back to his old life as translator and scout, no more balancing between Cheyenne and white worlds. He had chosen a side. Finally, after 19 years of careful neutrality, he had chosen. Thank you, Uncle, he said, for everything. Red Knife smiled, a rare expression on his stern face. Thank your grandmother. She is the one who taught you to be a man worth respecting. Then he wheeled his horse and rode east with his warriors, leaving Neshoba alone with Clara, Jamie, and Little Hawk. They took the northern trail. Within an hour, they heard the sounds of pursuit veer east, following Red Knife's trail just as planned. They were alone now, exhausted and injured, and dangerously exposed, but alone. They rode through the morning and into the afternoon, stopping only when the horses absolutely had to rest. They were in rough country now, high mountain passes, where snow still lingered in the shadows, and the air was thin enough to leave them gasping. It was in one of these high passes, as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, that disaster struck. They came around a bend and found their way blocked by 5 men on horseback. But these were not soldiers. The man at their head was Ephraim Keats, the banker, holding a pistol with the nervous grip of someone not entirely comfortable with weapons, but desperate enough to use them anyway. "That's far enough," Keats called out, his voice shaking slightly. "I can't let you reach Laramie, Clara. I can't let you deliver those pages to the judge." Clara stared at him with an expression of utter betrayal. "Ephraim, you were supposed to help us. I paid you. I know what you paid me, and I'm sorry. I truly am." Keats' face was pale and sweating despite the cold. But Lieutenant Kruger gave me no choice. He discovered I'd been embezzling from the militia accounts to cover gambling debts. He said he would destroy me, ruin my family, unless I told him about your plans and helped stop you from reaching the judge. "So you sold us out." Clara's voice was flat dead. "You told Hart where we would be." "I told Kruger about the mine tunnels, yes. I hoped they would just arrest you, that no one would get hurt." Keats swallowed hard. "But then I heard about the cave-in, about Hart and the others being killed or trapped. Kruger is furious. He's sent word to Laramie, to all his contacts, spinning a story about how you kidnapped his prisoner, killed his men, and are probably working with hostile Indians to stir up trouble." "That's a lie," Clara said. "Every word of it is a lie, and you know it." "I know. But it doesn't matter what I know. It matters what Kruger can make people believe. And right now, his version of events is spreading faster than yours ever could." Keats raised the pistol, his hand shaking so badly the barrel wavered. "Give me those pages, Clara. The copies from your ledger. Give them to me and I'll let you ride away. You can disappear into the wilderness, start over somewhere. But those pages have to be destroyed." Neshoba's hand moved slowly toward his rifle. He was exhausted, his reaction slowed by cold and fatigue, but he thought he could draw and fire before Keats could shoot Clara. It would be close, though. Very close. "Don't," Keats said, noticing the movement. He shifted his aim from Clara to Jamie, who sat in front of her on the horse. "I don't want to hurt the boy, but I will if you force me to. Kruger promised to take care of my family if I handle this. I can't fail him." The world seemed to slow down. Neshoba saw Clara's face go white, saw her arms tighten protectively around Jamie. Saw Little Hawk sitting on his horse, pale and shaking with exhaustion and pain, but his eyes sharp alert. And Neshoba realized with sudden terrible clarity that they could not win this by force. Keats was too nervous, his finger too tight on the trigger. One wrong move and Jamie would die. But there might be another way. "You are right, Keats," Neshoba said calmly, lowering his hand away from his rifle. "We cannot reach Laramie. Not against Kruger's resources, his connections. He is too powerful." Clara turned to stare at him, confusion and betrayal in her eyes. "Neshoba, what are you—" "We should give him the pages." Neshoba continued, his voice steady. "Let Kruger win. Let him keep his stolen lands and his dirty secrets. What does it matter to us? We can just run like Keats said. Disappear. Survive." "You don't mean that," Clara said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "Why not? What has fighting ever gotten me except scars and grief?" Neshoba dismounted slowly, keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. "I survived Sand Creek by running. I survived the last 19 years by keeping my head down and not making trouble. Maybe that is the smart way. The only way." He pulled the oilcloth bundle from inside his shirt as he spoke, his movements slow and deliberate. Keats tracked him with the pistol, but the banker's attention was focused on the papers on his salvation. "That is right," Keats said, relief flooding his voice. "You're being smart. Just hand them over, and this ends peacefully. Neshoba walked forward, closing the distance between himself and Keats's horse. 10 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet. He held out the bundle, and Keats reached for it eagerly, his pistol dipping slightly as his attention fixed on the papers. In that moment of distraction, Neshoba moved. He was exhausted, injured slower than he should have been, but he was also desperate, and desperation gave him speed he did not know he still possessed. He lunged forward and grabbed the pistol barrel with his left hand, twisting it up and away from Jamie. With his right hand, he drove his fist into Keats's wrist with all his remaining strength. The pistol fired the shot, going wild into the air. Keats yelped and dropped the weapon, and Neshoba caught it before it could fall. The other men with Keats, local thugs hired for this job, not soldiers, reached for their own weapons. But Clara was faster. She pulled a small derringer from inside her coat, a weapon Neshoba had not known she carried, and fired at the nearest man. The bullet struck him in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse. The other men hesitated, suddenly realizing this was not going to be the easy ambush they had been promised. That hesitation cost them. Neshoba raised Keats's pistol and fired at another man's horse, deliberately missing the rider but spooking the animal. The horse reared and bolted, carrying its rider away down the trail. The remaining men broke and ran, their courage evaporating like morning dew. Keats sat on his horse, holding his bruised wrist, his face a mask of despair. "You've killed me," he said quietly. "When Kruger finds out I failed when he tells everyone about the embezzling, my life is over." "Then come with us," Clara said, "to Laramie. Testify against Kruger. Help us expose the truth. Maybe you can salvage something from this disaster." Keats looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "I can't. I'm a coward, Clara. I've been a coward my whole life. I don't have it in me to stand up to men like Kruger." He turned his horse and rode away down the trail, his shoulders slumped in defeat. They watched him go, and Neshoba felt a strange mixture of pity and contempt. Keats had been given a chance to do the right thing and had chosen fear instead, just like Neshoba himself had done for 19 years, until Clara had shown him another way. "We should keep moving," Neshoba said quietly, "before Keats changes his mind or finds more courage than I think he possesses." They rode on through the afternoon and into the evening, pushing themselves and their horses to the limits of endurance. When darkness fell, they stopped in a sheltered canyon and made a cold camp, no fire, no hot food, just huddling together for warmth and trying to sleep, despite exhaustion so profound it was almost painful. Neshoba took first watch, his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. Clara sat beside him, Jamie asleep in her lap, her head resting on Neshoba's shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did with Keats, for not actually giving him the papers. I was so scared for a moment that you meant it, that you were really giving up." "I thought about it," Neshoba admitted. "For one moment, I genuinely thought about just handing them over and running. It would have been easier. But you didn't." "No, because my grandmother did not raise a coward, and because—" He paused, trying to find the right words. "Because you deserve better than a man who gives up when things get hard. You have been so brave, so strong through all of this. You deserve someone who will stand beside you, not behind you." Clara turned to look at him, and in the moonlight, her eyes were bright with tears. "I've never had someone stand beside me before. Not really. Everyone either wanted to control me or save me or use me. But you treat me like an equal, like a partner. You are my equal, my partner." Neshoba touched her face gently, his fingers tracing the line of bruises that were finally starting to fade. We survived together, or not at all. Clara leaned forward and kissed him a brief pressure of cold lips that somehow held more warmth than any fire could provide. It was not their first kiss. They had stolen moments in the mind-brief touches in the darkness when fear of death made them cling to any connection, any reminder that they were still alive. But this was different. This was not fear or desperation, but something else. Something that felt like the beginning of something permanent. When they broke apart, Clara rested her forehead against his. When this is over, if we survive, I want... She stopped, unable to finish. I know, Neshoba said quietly. I want the same thing. They sat together in the darkness, keeping watch, keeping each other warm, until it was Clara's turn to take watch and Neshoba's turn to try to sleep. He lay down beside Jamie, and Little Hawk pulled a blanket over them all and fell into exhausted sleep, filled with dreams of mountains and mines and a future that might actually be worth living for. They reached Laramie 2 days later, exhausted and filthy, and barely able to sit their horses, but alive. The town was bigger than Shadow Lake, more of a real city than a frontier settlement with actual streets and buildings and a courthouse that looked like it might survive the winter. They went straight to Judge Harrison's office, and the bundle of papers clutched in Clara's trembling hands. The judge was a gray-haired man in his 60s, with sharp eyes and the kind of face that had seen too much injustice to be shocked by anything. He listened to their story without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. When Clara finished and laid the papers on his desk, he studied them carefully, his finger tracing down the columns of figures and the lists of names and dates. This is damning, he said finally. If even half of what's documented here is accurate, Lieutenant Kruger and his associates have been running one of the most extensive fraud schemes I've seen in 30 years on the bench. It's all accurate, Your Honor, Clara said. I kept those records myself. Every transaction, every bribe, every stolen acre of land. I can testify to all of it under oath. And we can prove the boy was falsely accused, Neshoba added. Clara witnessed the actual events. Kruger's men killed the freighter, not Little Hawk. Judge Harrison nodded slowly. I'll issue warrants immediately for Kruger's arrest and the arrest of everyone named in these pages. But you need to understand that these are powerful men with powerful friends. They will fight this with everything they have. They'll try to discredit you, threaten you, maybe worse. Let them try, Clara said. I'm done being afraid. The judge studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. I believe you are. All right. I'll need sworn statements from all of you, and I'll need the boy available to testify when the time comes. Can you stay in Laramie until the trial? We don't have anywhere else to go, Clara said simply. Judge Harrison arranged for them to stay at a boarding house run by a widow who had no love for corrupt officials and was happy to provide sanctuary. They spent the next 3 weeks giving depositions, talking to territorial marshals preparing for the trial that would determine whether justice was just a word or something real. And during those 3 weeks, Neshoba and Clara began to build something between them. Not a romance born of desperation and fear, but something quieter, deeper. They talked about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Clara told him about her sister who had died of consumption, leaving Jamie in her care. About her own marriage to a man who had been kind but distant, who had died before they could build anything real together. Neshoba told her about Sand Creek, about the guilt he carried for surviving when so many had not. About his grandmother's teachings and his long years of trying to walk between two worlds while belonging to neither. They were both damaged people, both scarred by losses and betrayals. But maybe that was why they fit together, because they understood that love did not erase pain. It just made the pain bearable. The trial began in late April, after the mountain passes had opened and witnesses could be brought to Laramie. The courtroom was packed every day with people who wanted to see whether justice was possible in a territory where money and connections usually trumped truth. Lieutenant Kruger stood trial alongside 6 of his co-conspirators, all charged with fraud, corruption, and in Kruger's case, accessory to murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Clara's pages from her ledger corroborated by testimony from dozens of witnesses who had been too afraid to speak out before, but who found courage in numbers. Little Hawk testified, his young voice steady, as he described the night the freighter had attacked his uncle and how he had defended his family. Clara corroborated every detail, her testimony precise and unshakable. The defense tried to discredit them, called Clara a woman of loose morals because she ran a saloon called Neshoba, a traitor to the military that had employed him, called Little Hawk, a savage who could not be trusted. But Judge Harrison shut down those attacks with sharp words about the difference between character assassination and actual defense. The prosecution also revealed something unexpected: evidence that Kruger had not acted alone, that Ephraim Keats had been his accomplice from the beginning, using his position as banker to launder the proceeds from stolen land sales and forged documents to legitimize fraudulent claims. But Keats was not present to defend himself. He had disappeared the day after his failed ambush in the mountains. No one had seen him since. Some said he had fled to Mexico. Others whispered that Kruger had silenced him permanently. The truth remained unknown. Oliver Pike testified, his voice breaking, as he admitted to helping Kruger under threat to Jamie's safety. He begged Clara's forgiveness from the witness stand, but she sat stone-faced through his testimony, unmoved by his tears. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned with a verdict of guilty on all counts for Kruger and most of his co-conspirators. The judge sentenced Kruger to 20 years in the territorial prison. The others received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. The courtroom erupted in applause, and Clara collapsed in her seat with relief so profound she could barely breathe. Neshoba put his arm around her shoulders and held her while she cried, while the tension and fear and exhaustion of the past months finally broke through the walls she had built to contain them. But the victory came with costs. Clara's saloon in Shadow Lake had been seized by Kruger's creditors during the trial, sold to pay debts that Clara had not known existed. The fictitious debts that Kruger had created to punish her. She lost everything she had built over years of hard work. Neshoba had nothing to lose because he had never owned much beyond his horse and his grandmother's healing kit. But he lost his reputation among the militia, was branded a traitor, and a deserter told that he would be arrested on sight if he ever showed his face at any military installation. They were both homeless, both penniless, both marked as troublemakers in a territory that valued conformity and silence. But they were together, and they were alive. And they had won a victory that mattered more than property or reputation. They had proven that truth could triumph over power, at least sometimes, when people were brave enough to stand up and fight. 2 weeks after the trial ended, on a warm May morning, when the aspens were just beginning to leaf out on the mountainsides, Clara and Neshoba stood on the steps of the courthouse. A messenger had just delivered a letter from the territorial governor's office. Clara opened it with shaking hands and read aloud, "Dear Mrs. Pike, in recognition of your courage in exposing corruption within our territorial militia, and in acknowledgement of the personal losses you suffered in pursuit of justice, the Territory of Wyoming hereby grants you a settlement of $5,000 to be paid from assets seized from Lieutenant Kruger and his co-conspirators. Furthermore, the Territory has established the Clara Pike Fund for Justice, a permanent endowment to support those who seek to expose corruption and protect the vulnerable. You have our deepest gratitude and respect. Governor John W. Hoyt, $5,000. More money than Clara had ever imagined having. Enough to start over, to build a new life. She lowered the letter and looked at Neshoba with tears streaming down her face. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, Neshoba corrected gently. You are the one who kept those records, who risked everything, who refused to give up, even when any sane person would have. We did it together. Clara took his hand. I couldn't have survived without you. Couldn't have made it through the mine, couldn't have faced Kruger, couldn't have testified without knowing you were there beside me. Little Hawk and Jamie stood nearby, both boys looking healthier now after weeks of good food and rest. Little Hawk's shoulder had healed, though it would never be quite as strong as before. Jamie's asthma had improved in the warmer weather, his breathing easier. What do we do now? Jamie asked, looking up at Clara with those two old eyes. Where do we go? Clara looked at Neshoba, a question in her eyes. They had not talked about the future in concrete terms, had not made plans beyond surviving the trial. But now the future stretched ahead of them, uncertain, but full of possibility. We could go anywhere, Neshoba said quietly. California, maybe. Oregon. Somewhere far from Wyoming and all its memories. Or we could stay, Clara said. Buy a small piece of land, build something new. Wyoming territory has progressive laws. Women can vote here, own property, run businesses. Maybe we could use that. Maybe we could build something that helps other people the way we were helped. Neshoba thought about it. About his grandmother's teachings, about the healing knowledge she had given him. About Clara's skill with numbers and organization. About the two boys who needed a home and a future. A clinic, he said slowly. I could practice healing, setting bones, treating illnesses. You could manage the business side. We could serve people who can't afford the expensive doctors in town. Indians, poor whites, anyone who needs help. A clinic. Clara smiled, and for the first time since Neshoba had met her, the smile reached her eyes and chased away the shadows there. Yes, that could work. It will be hard, Neshoba warned. People will talk. A Cheyenne man and a white woman together, unmarried, working side by side. The scandal alone. Then we get married, Clara interrupted. Wyoming allows it. Interracial marriages are legal here. And she paused, her hand moving to her belly, which was now obviously swollen beneath her dress. And in about 2 months, there's going to be a baby who deserves to have both parents legally recognized. Neshoba felt something unlock in his chest, some final wall crumbling. Are you proposing to me, Clara Pike? I suppose I am. She smiled, tentative but hopeful. What do you say, Neshoba? Will you marry a stubborn saloon keeper with too many opinions and not enough sense to stay out of trouble? Yes, he said simply, on one condition. What condition? That you promise to never stop being stubborn and opinionated and brave. That you promise to keep fighting for what's right, even when it's hard. That you promise to be my partner, my equal, my... He struggled to find the English word, then switched to Cheyenne. My nehau, my companion through life. I don't know what that means, Clara said. But yes, whatever it means, yes. They stood together on the courthouse steps, two damaged people who had found each other in the worst circumstances, and somehow built something good from the wreckage. Around them, Laramie went about its business horses and wagons, in the streets, people hurrying to shops and offices, life continuing as it always did. But for Neshoba and Clara, this moment felt like the world had stopped, had paused to acknowledge that something important was happening. Not a fairy tale ending where everything was perfect, but something real. Something earned. We're going to face a lot of problems, Clara said quietly. A lot of people won't accept us. There will be racism, judgment, maybe violence. I know. And I don't know if we'll succeed. The clinic might fail. We might run out of money. We might survive and build something good. Neshoba interrupted gently. We might raise these boys to be good men. We might heal people and help people and make this territory a little less cruel than it was when we started. We might actually be happy. Clara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and felt the baby kick a strong, insistent movement that was both a reminder of the responsibility ahead and a promise of hope. When do you think the baby will come? 2 months, you said. Maybe less. Neshoba placed his hand on her belly, feeling the life moving beneath his palm. Are you scared? Terrified? But also... She paused, searching for the right word. Also ready? I've spent so long being afraid, hiding, pretending to be less than I am, so men wouldn't feel threatened. I'm tired of that. I want to be myself. I want to build a life where I don't have to hide anything, not my intelligence, not my opinions, not this baby, not my love for you. Then that is what we will build, Neshoba said. Together. Little Hawk and Jamie came to stand with them, and the 4 of them, soon to be 5, looked out at the mountains that ringed Laramie, at the future that stretched ahead of them, uncertain and challenging and full of possibility. They would face problems. Wyoming's progressive laws did not mean progressive attitudes, and there would be people who saw their relationship as wrong, their clinic as a threat, their very existence as something to be opposed. But they had survived worse. They had walked through darkness beneath a mountain and come out the other side. They had faced down corrupt men with guns and power, and won with nothing but courage and truth. They could survive anything. What do we do first? Jamie asked. Clara and Neshoba looked at each other, a whole conversation passing between them in a glance. First, Clara said, we find a place to live. Somewhere with enough room for all of us and space for a clinic. Then we get married, Neshoba added. Then we start helping people, Clara finished. 1 person at a time, 1 day at a time, until this territory is a better place than it was. Can we get a dog? Jamie asked. I miss the shepherd dog that stayed with us in the mine. Clara laughed, a sound of pure joy that Neshoba had never heard from her before. Yes, we can get a dog. They walked down the courthouse steps together, into the warm spring morning, into the uncertain future, into the life they would build from the ruins of the old. Behind them, the courthouse bells rang out, marking the hour, marking the moment, marking the beginning of something that would echo through Wyoming Territory history for generations to come. In the story of the Cheyenne scout and the saloon keeper who risked everything for justice and found love in the process. But that was for historians to chronicle. For now they had more immediate concerns: finding a home, planning a wedding, preparing for a baby, starting a clinic. For now, they had each other, and that was enough.